February 25th, 2022, Elden Ring annihilates the globe with its launch.
Elden Ring. What?
Before it released, the world speculated it would become Game of the Year, or worse, this year's Cyberpunk. Pedantic humor aside, it was a success. Hell, success is an understatement. Elden Ring has surpassed 16.5 million units shipped as of June 30th, 2022, and likely closing in on 20 million by now. It's easy to look back and say it was obvious Elden Ring would have succeeded, but the facts beg to differ. Comparing the two largest From Software games previous to Elden Ring's release, Dark Souls 3 sold 10 million copies after 4 years. Sekiro had 5 million copies sold in almost a year and a half. These two games still have fewer copies sold combined than Elden Ring does on its own. Not to mention that in June 2019, From Software reported that the entire Souls series had sold a collective 25 million copies, which again, Elden Ring is expected to surpass by itself soon enough. I mean, currently, Elden Ring is the 6th most played game of all time just on Steam. Now, this isn't some, melodramatic video about how I feel or how others might feel that the game is dead 6 months later, because unlike other videos, I'm trying to focus on purely the facts and have gathered data and did some nerd stuff for the occasion, like I always do. So be sure to drop a fat like and a massive sub, because surprisingly, 80% of the people who watch my videos are not subscribed. You already watched my videos, so you might as well stay. It's completely free and helps me out on the road to 100,000 subscribers, and you're always free to unsub later. And also, the whole Elden Ring is dead argument is completely ridiculous. It's a single-player game whose multiplayer features have been ostracized by a community at war with each other. And it's not like this war is even 50-50 either. There's an astounding majority of the player base that doesn't care for Elden Ring's multiplayer and have tried it and either got bored or didn't like it. When a game gets large enough, it attracts a player base that wasn't the intended demographic. A prevalent situation as Elden Ring has become most people's first Souls game, but I've been playing Souls games for years and was watching live the day the game was announced back in 2019 at E3. Even if someone hasn't played it, there's a good chance they might know or watch someone else play it. Now, I want to emphasize there's nothing wrong with a demographic growing. The fact that Elden Ring has achieved such a broad audience compared to anything else FromSoft has created can only be described as a net positive. Unlike with Dark Souls, FromSoft has prioritized appealing to the largest audience possible with Elden Ring. This fact is further solidified by the way FromSoft has released their patch notes and updates for this game. I'm qualified to speak on this since I was actually the first person to start covering Elden Ring patches and updates before anyone else did, and I literally got trending on YouTube because of this. Anyways, Elden Ring has had about 3 to 4 major patches 6 months after it was released. There's also an equal amount of minor patches filled with general bug fixes and performance fixes, so I'll try to provide a summary that focuses on the most significant changes for both single player and multiplayer respectively. However, it was only the most recent Elden Ring 1.06 patch in August 2022 that started listening to community feedback for the first time. They adjusted items like Bloodhound Step to not be spammable, and even Rivers of Blood doing less damage and less blood loss buildup. No matter what side you're on in this matter, it's great that they are choosing to listen to what players are saying at all. They never have until now, and realistically don't need to. For example, one specific change that made me happy was something that I played a direct part in fixing. The Sword of St. Trina had been bugged since the game was released. After you use the Sleeping Mist Ash of War, your weapon is supposed to receive a buff that gives you double the sleep buildup for your weapon, which is a lot, going from 66 to 132. I have a full video for that already here, but most people didn't realize that this was not intentional. The problem was, it never did. I mean, it did, but if you ever got hit, it just disappeared and turned itself off. However, my video was the first and only video to point out this bug, and this bug ended up getting noticed by someone on the dev team and eventually fixed in the same 1.06 patch. Continuing community feedback, FromSoft also added a feature known as Wex Dust in that patch, which essentially means you can invade anyone from any location, and they don't have to be in the same area anymore, which helps matchmaking take place faster. However, it doesn't help that there are still no goals or incentives to play online like covenants or arenas in previous games, but I digress. As far as significant multiplayer changes go, that's about it. You'll notice that the entirety of patches prior to 1.06 solely focus on enhancing the single-player experience. As previously mentioned, this was intentional to broaden their audience, allowing everything to be overpowered and even buffing things that didn't feel as good as the rest. It just becomes more clear that FromSoft cares less about multiplayer with all the patches prior to 1.6. Now, this isn't inherently a bad thing. From a game design perspective, you can't make everyone happy. You need to prioritize and satisfy the largest possible demographic for your game to sell well, which should sound like a no-brainer. Bug fixes aside, the most significant single-player-oriented changes in the last 6 months initially started out with making arcane weapons viable, as they used to be completely unusable by not properly scaling with arcane. Specific items that allowed people to speedrun through the game faster than FromSoft wanted, both figuratively and literally, were also hit, like the Mimic Tier nerf and the destruction of the Sword of Night and Flame and the Hoarfrost Stomp. On the bright side, a ton of quality of life changes were implemented with, again, the single-player experience in mind, such as marking NPCs on the map when you meet them, so you don't forget who is where in their massive open world. FromSoft also included additional NPC content that got updated to either have a proper ending or content that didn't previously exist, like the Nepheli Kenneth Haight questline and the introduction of Jar Baron both as an NPC and their quests respectively. They also wanted players to expand their taste and playstyle. With over 300 unique weapons in the game, certain items were clearly stronger than others, and instead of bringing the strong items down, they brought the weaker items up, which is a really important decision to make as a game designer. Colossal weapons and great swords receive damage and attack speed buffs to make these options more appealing, as well as pretty much every spell and incantation receiving an increased cast speed and reduced mana cost, with quite a few gaining hyper armor so that they can be cast without being interrupted. Even a ton of Ashes of War were also buffed to become the same way. Additional quality of life changes for both smithing stones and glovewort bell bearings allow them to persist upon resetting your playthrough via New Game Plus. But it doesn't stop there. From glowing icons to help the player identify when they can speak to Melina or Ronnie, or when they can increase their flash charges and efficiency. Even adding automatic markers that update on players' maps when important events take place so that players know where to go. Before this, most people glossed by things like the meteorite crater that takes you underground after you beat Radahn, or got lost after obtaining the medallion from defeating Morgott. So what's the point? These are what I consider to be the most significant changes that were added during the 6-month time frame after Elden Ring's initial release, but what's the purpose of me going through it all? Well, there's clearly a majority lack of interest on the multiplayer side. After all, a single-player game is never quite the same after the first playthrough. The mystery and awe of never knowing what comes next is like no other. After beating the game, most people move on and already have the wish to experience Elden Ring for the first time again, because replaying it just doesn't feel the same. And this is what happens with primarily single-player experiences. You do have a few people like me who still don't mind replaying it and producing engaging content surrounding the game months later. Hell, my channel has completely grown for being one of the first people to discover rare items like the Hand of Melania, Rivers of Blood, Double Seppuku, and creating some of the most unique game-breaking builds like my Exploding Crystal Tear Flask video that received well over 1 million views. So thank you guys so much. But from everything I've mentioned, the core audience seems to mostly desire single-player content. Even FromSoft prioritized the single-player experience themselves. But something just feels off about this. Despite single-player being the most important aspect of Elden Ring, if we look at the statistics from Steam's own website, we can see that 80% of the player base on PC who downloaded and ran the game visited the Roundtable Hold, which means 20% of all players on their computer still haven't. This seems so trivial, as the Roundtable Hold is one of the earliest parts of the game and is locked behind defeating Margit, but it isn't even required that way. If you wait long enough or travel far enough, Melina will just appear and ask you to go, even if you haven't beat Margit yet. From all the updates, statistics, and even viewership points to the single-player experience being the most desired aspect Elden Ring has to offer. But an average of less than 20% of players have achieved at least one of the 3 possible achievements relating to the completion of the game. The most achieved ending was Ronnie's ending, but even then it's only been achieved by 26% of the players on PC. 19% of the players achieve some form of the generic ending, such as Dung Eaters, Fias, or just by yourself. And a minuscule 13% of all players achieved the Frenzied Flame ending, which in my opinion was the coolest. Now, keep in mind, those achievements are not uniquely achieved, meaning it's completely possible for a player to achieve all 3 endings or none of them, which can skew the percentages. For example, I myself have a 100% completion for the game, meaning that I add towards all ending statistics. Some people might only add towards one and then never touch the game again, but there's still an astounding majority of players who haven't added to that percentage at all, which in turn means that there was even less players than the percentages suggest that have completed the game. I wanted to spark some discussion for the game because I feel that 6 months is a pretty good time frame for any game to be completed, even one as big as Elden Ring for the average player. And you'd think that FromSoft dedicating most of its resources to improving the single-player experience in general would help increase that completion rate. However, the average player data is surprisingly low across the board. Despite FromSoft focusing so heavily on their single-player experience and the majority of the player base only enjoying Elden Ring for its main storyline, it's completely backfired at this point. And yes, the game is still amazing, without a doubt it is. And of course, it deserves Game of the Year. I love everything about this game, and FromSoft succeeded in making their game sell infinitely more copies than they otherwise would have. All of this seems good at a surface level, but it didn't actually change the outcome of the game's player base like FromSoft may have wanted with their unique approach to Elden Ring. In fact, the data proves that 50% of the player base still hasn't made it past Morgoth. I'm also willing to bet that most of the players that haven't finished the game still enjoyed their experience, but the data shows that the average player just couldn't or hasn't finished Elden Ring yet. The player base grew so large, most people that normally would never play Dark Souls bought Elden Ring solely because of the hype surrounding it, and then never beat it regardless of how much FromSoft tried making it more accessible with an open world, more respawn locations, countless spirit ashes, insanely broken spells, weapons, and items, and dedicating all their patches to further improve the single player experience. While trying to grow their audience, Elden Ring grew too large and obtained an audience that wouldn't actually enjoy the game to completion. All while people who endlessly love the series like myself and do enjoy the multiplayer wish the game had more replayability, but instead got the short end of the stick. I'm still extremely happy for all that Elden Ring has accomplished, so please don't take this as me not liking the game. I still love it and it deserves all the praise it gets. But I hope that after showing this raw data, FromSoft continues to make more patches similar to 1.06 that just completely focuses on improving multiplayer and listening to the community. I'll still keep making videos for Elden Ring because I genuinely enjoy playing it, but I wanted to try something new in the form of a video essay because I gathered tons of data in order to formulate a more objective argument. But hey, who knows what we got in store, and if anyone at FromSoft ends up seeing this, keep up the good work and know that the community still loves your game and everything you do. We're just a bit nervous, but still excited to see what the future holds.